word, the Good Samaritan, we often relate it to that children's story, right? That moment where the children are listening to this parable, or they're probably seeing a short video on it, and there's always a lesson to learn out of this parable. You might say, well, we learn that we need to put love into action, or some people take away from this parable the following: well, we need to help those that are hurting. There's many moral lessons found in this story, but what I want to do today is dig a little deeper and find the practical things that we can apply to our church in this coming year. 2023 is a new year. It's a fresh start. God has given us that privilege. And maybe some of you don't have to raise your hands, but maybe some of you have set some goals this year, right? Like every year. Some of us follow through, some of us do fulfill those goals. Some of us end up probably around January 2 or 3 or 7 or February, right? There's some lucky people that go until March, and I so want to congratulate you. Some of us get stuck in the middle, right? And don't fulfill those goals. But I want to encourage the whole church this morning that just as this story will teach us today about who our neighbor is, I pray that this will be my prayer this year, that the Elkhart Church could be a good neighbor, could be a better neighbor, could be a loving neighbor. Because we learn in this story that Jesus wanted to teach something to his audience. Who was his audience? The Jews. And so the Jews, as you all know this background, just let me take a minute here to give you some context. The Jews did not get along with the Samaritans. There was conflict between them going on, constant conflict. The Jews would see the Samaritans as inferior. And so when Jesus comes and tells them this story and shares with them this story, he puts the Samaritan as the hero of the story. Very interesting, because the Jews were not expecting that. They were expecting to hear something like, yes, the Jews are those that, people need to look up to and follow their example. But we learn right from the start, and we'll read it together, but we learn right from the start that even our enemies are our neighbors. Consider our neighbors. So why don't we go to Luke chapter 10 as a whole, and let's read, church, Luke chapter 10. Follow with me, verses 25 to 37, because we can't read this enough. I know you've read this several times, but it doesn't hurt to read it one more time. Luke chapter 10, verse 25 to 37. I'm reading the ESV version. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? So that's the question that we will be answering today, because Jesus answered it. Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, "The one who showed mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." As we break down the story into pieces, we start with a bad note. We start in the introduction, noticing that there's an internal problem in this person's heart. There's something wrong in his heart. There is something that God needs to fix in this man's heart. Because you see, the lawyer, he knew about the law. He knew about what he needed to do. But he was hesitant. He wasn't completely convinced. Now, the other thing we do hear in this story, and we do find, is that there is this commute. There is this path in which the Levite and the priests would often go through, and that's the way from Jerusalem to Jericho. This story tells us a little bit about the background, about what was happening at that time, and it was famous for its crime. People would often get robbed. If you look at the map, you would see that it's a short distance. It was very common for people to get robbed. And so we also learn from this story that a priest and a Levite are mentioned. It's interesting when I read this story to find out that the priest and the Levite have something in common. I don't know if you noticed that too. They're both, we would call religious, maybe, persons, because they had something to do with the religious aspect. They had duties to do in the sanctuary, and they were known to be people of God. They were known to be worker, servant. But it's interesting also to find that out of these people, out of these groups, the Jews and the Levites, they didn't stop. They didn't have compassion. They were expected to go on and do more, to show mercy, to give a helping hand. But there's also something more in this story, in the last verse, where, remember when Jesus was asking him, who here is the neighbor? We were supposed to hear the answer as the following. Well, it was a Samaritan, right? We all agree. Yet he never even mentions that name. He says, the one who showed mercy. See, his heart still wasn't fixed. He was still saying the one who showed mercy, not the Samaritan. Now let's take this to another level. Let's put this in our terms. Let's put this into 2023. There are five things that I found in this story that I want you to underline, that I want you to write down, that I want you to just remember, because these are five things that the Samaritan did that we can do today too. Because you can be a Samaritan also in your workplace, with your family, with your friends, and you can make a difference. You can bless others. I love this story this morning of the children's story because it goes with today's message. But let's read one more time verse 33, and this is where we find the first. Verse 33. The Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had what? Compassion. That is the first thing I want us to remember. That is the first thing that the Samaritan did before helping him. He opened his eyes. He opened his eyes. Church, if we want to help others this year, if we want to be the church that God wants us to be, we need to start by opening our eyes. We need to open our eyes and not close them. Because sometimes that happens, where we see that there's needs and we look the other way. But the Samaritan teaches us that we need to first open our eyes. If we could only open our eyes, we would see that there is so much need around us. If we could only open our eyes, we would see that we're in a spiritual battleground. If we could only open our eyes, we could see that there's people that are hurting, that there are people that are broken, that there are people that need you at this time, at this hour. Everybody got that? Number one, the Samaritan opened his eyes. The next thing he opened, number two, he opened his heart and had compassion. That's the next thing. We're going to see 5 steps that he took. He first opened his eyes, and then he opened his heart. What does it mean to open your heart, church? What does it mean to open your heart? It means that you don't think about yourself, but you put others first. It means that you will find the way to bring healing, to bring peace, to serve, and to make a difference. Number 1 and number 2 go hand in hand. You can't just open your eyes and not do anything. It takes you to the next part. It takes you to the heart. You see, when Jesus spoke, he wanted to fix an internal issue with this lawyer, with this man of the law, because he knows that in your heart is where your mind and your actions begin. And so if there's anything that we need to ask the Lord this year is, Lord, fix my heart. Maybe do a little surgery where it needs. it needs a little fixing, because I need to have my heart open, ready to give and to serve. Number 3, the Samaritan opened his hands. See, first he opened his eyes, then he had compassion, and then he opened his hands. Verse 34. Let's read verse 34 one more time. It says, he went to him and bound up his wounds. He set him on his own animal. It might have been a donkey. It might have been a horse. It might have been, it took energy. It took sweat. He got dirty, his hands dirty. He went beyond because he opened his hands. You see, this story is telling us what it means to open our hands. It means putting our words into action. It means that if we say we're going to do something, we do it. See, he didn't act like the Levite or the priest. He actually knelt down and carried him and took him and healed him. He didn't leave until he was healed. I wonder what our church would look like if we did that this year. And this takes us to the next point, number 4. I said there were 5, and we're on number 4. And it's found in verse 35. I'll let you see if you can identify what is the next thing he opened. Let's read verse 35. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever you spend, I will repay when I come back. What's the next thing he opened? His wallet. Yes, his wallet. He opened his wallet. He opened his pockets. He opened his resources, even before he was asked to do so. See, these are the type of people that are grateful, that are thankful, that just, and I'm just amazed how God works everything, because even this morning's lesson was on tithing and giving, right? And so if you understand that nothing is yours, that God called you to be a blessing, that everything you have is for you to share, and it's not yours, you're a steward, you will be a good Samaritan as well, and you will be a good neighbor. Because being a good neighbor also involves opening your resources and not keeping it all for yourself. I know it's hard. I know it's a very controversial topic, and not a lot of pastors like to talk about money, but if there's a subject that is talked a lot in the Bible, it's about money. It's how we use our money, how we use our resources. And here we're learning that to be a good neighbor means to use it on others, to bless others. Number 5, and this is our last one. The Samaritan opened his busy schedule. And I think this is the one that is more important and the one that hit me the most. The Samaritan opened his time schedule. He opened his time. Did you know that that's the most valuable thing you can give to somebody? Worth more than money? Your time? Because money comes and goes, right? You have money, you can have it tomorrow, you can have it again, but time, you can't bring that back. Can we just I remember when they used to do this when I was in elementary school, right? They said, put in your thinking caps, or put on your imagination, cap, and let's just imagine this man. Maybe, and let's just imagine that maybe he had an appointment to go to. Or maybe his wife, he had a date with his wife, or maybe he had somewhere to go. But he stopped and he helped. But not only that, the story tells us that he even he said he was gonna what? Come back. That wasn't a 20-minute helping session or a 10-minute visitation. That took time. You see, today, church, we have that same opportunity to be a good neighbor with those around us, to show that Jesus lives in us, to show that God has transformed us and has made us to be a blessing. The most important part of this story is that it also reflects what Jesus did in the cross for you and me, because he is the Good Samaritan, because he is the one that took you and healed you and took his time to show mercy. He went above and beyond. He didn't have to, yet he chose to, because he loves you. I don't want us to just focus on us. Focus on, let's try to be the Samaritan. No, let's try to be Jesus. Because that's who the Good Samaritan is. Jesus is the good neighbor. There's this quote that I want to share with you, and it's found in a book called Christ Object Lessons. You probably heard of that book, and it's on chapter 27. And it's one of the first paragraphs. And it struck me, and I want to close with this. Among the Jews, there was this question, who is my neighbor? Which caused endless dispute. Whom should the priest and the rabbi, the elder, regard as a neighbor? They spent their lives in around ceremonies to make themselves pure. Contact with the multitude, they thought, would cause defilement that would require some wearisome effort to remove. Were they to regard the unclean as neighbors? But Christ answered this question in the parable of the Good Samaritan. He showed that our neighbor does not mean merely one of the church, or faith to which we belong. It has no reference to race, color, or class distinction. Our neighbor is every person who needs our help. Our neighbor is every person, every soul who is wounded and bruised by the adversary. Our neighbor is everyone who is the property of God. Can we just recap what we shared this morning? To be a good Samaritan, to be a good neighbor this year, let's start by opening what? Our eyes. Number 2, pop quiz. Number 2, let's open our hearts. Number 3, let's open our hands. Number 4, let's not be scared to open our wallets. And number 5, let's open our busy schedules.